Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are tuning in from or if you are catching us on replay. This is The Awesome Journey, and I am your host, Kelly Steinicke, along with my co-host in care, Christy Howard. And we are just two girls that met on LinkedIn 15 years ago, live on opposite sides of the country, have giving hearts, a passion for paying it forward, and I may have prayed to be living louder in my purpose. And now here we sit in front of microphones bringing you the awesome journey. And as many of you know, one of our major goals here was to highlight incredible individuals to share their unique stories and challenges, because let's be honest, we're all united in our personal journeys. And what we've also been doing along the way, and I know many of you have noticed this, is highlighting job seekers, because we see the job market, so many layoffs, and wanted to do what we could to help as many people as possible. And today's episode is extra special because we have with us Brenden Gilbert. And as you can see, we've got two interpreters with us. Brenden is a deaf job seeker. So this is just going to be a great experience for him to share his journey job seeking. And I want to spend as much time with him as possible. So before we turn it over to Brenden, I will turn it over to my co-host in care, Christy Howard.
Hello, we love Tuesdays. And I've been excited about this because when we booked it, and if some of you noticed, I created the event and then I had to cancel it because I forgot about the closed captions. And then I forgot that Brenden was deaf. So how could he go live and hear us? So I'm a little slow on that one. So I'm just really excited because I want to hear his journey of how how it's going. Our company's going, okay, we're all about diversity, blah, blah, blah. But we're not going to talk to you because you're deaf. We're not going to do stuff. And, so we want to know how his journey has been. He worked for Meta before. And so obviously it was a large company. And where, the struggles, what's happened, the wonderful emails he gets from people, the scammers, the AI bots, and just share your story. So it's all yours, hon.
Well, thank you for having me on this show. I'm really excited to inspire people and share about my experience as a deaf person in the tech world. 27 years ago, I started the workforce, but I have been a deaf person for 49 years, and I've had to face different challenges throughout my life since birth. I was lucky because I was put into a mainstream educational system. My mom supported me, pushed me to do that, pushed me to read, and I feel like that really added to my success. My mom is not with us anymore. She died in 2017. So I'm really grateful for all the work that she invested in me. She always told me that I could do anything that I wanted. And that is something I carry with me to this day. At 11 years old, I got an Apple IIe. I don't know if you remember that old computer. Many people don't know about that today. One of those computers you had to sit, wait 10 minutes for it to turn on, and then you could play a game. That was the type of computer I started with. It took so long to get it running, but that's how I learned. I learned how to work on computers because I didn't have a lot of good hearing friends in my home environment. I didn't really have a way to communicate with people and my peers in my neighborhood. So I spent a lot of time on the computers. I read books, I played games, I learned how to program, and that's how I got to where I was today. I have natural talent because I started at a very young age. My first job was in 1996. It wasn't that bad of a struggle because obviously it was an entry-level position. It was hard to get that first job because people kind of look at me as a deaf person and think that maybe I couldn't do it. But I got my first job and I was able to get in. I had a CEO from another country who had a deaf family member that decided to hire me. And that was my entry point into the field. But before I talk more about my career, I typically am hired by people that know how to work with disabled folks who perhaps are cool themselves, have a disabled person in their family, or know someone deaf in their life. They aren't worried about whether or not I can do that job because they have that experience and that exposure. Throughout my life, I've worked with various different companies, and I've gone through different, I think maybe 14 different companies that I've worked with. When I am not promoted and I notice that's a trend, I will move on. And so that is a way that I have been able to find better paying jobs, because when I'm staying in one place, sometimes there's communication issues, and I'm not promoted. I notice after a while, people will view me as not being able to be promoted, or they don't see my abilities as a leader because they're not able to communicate well with me.
Mm.
When I finally got to Meta, my world changed because I was able to access interpreting services for the first time in my environment as an employee. I was able to go to inspiring presentations. I was able to interact with my coworkers. And that's where my inclusive journey really started, was at Meta. At Meta, I worked at the data center as a hardware engineer. That was a different type of job that I left with. So I had 2 roles there, and I worked both at the same time, working with accessibility and with the hardware engineer position. I had lots of different situations that I've experienced. I could write a very, very large book about the different experiences that I've had throughout my career. Yeah, there's a lot of really cool people out there that I've worked with in the past. I've never had there's 1 or 2 companies that I've had bad experiences with. The rest of them have been very cool. They're willing to work with me, but they won't give me an interpreter for various reasons. They don't want to pay for it or whatever. And sometimes it's my fault, because disabled people or deaf people will sometimes avoid asking for accommodations because they don't want to be judged by the people in the company.
Yeah.
Maybe they're worried about the cost, or they are worried that they won't get hired because they request accommodation services. So I told myself to stop being worried about that and just ask for my accommodations and to communicate myself so people could see the value that I brought to the company.
I love that. And I think that last part, I mean, so much great story. That last part, which resonates to me personally, and I know we talked about this very briefly before we went on. I have a blind person in my family. So we've spoken about accessibility in the workplace, and when do you ask for those accommodations, or how do you bring it up? And is that going to be a conversation and then puts you out of the running? Like, I would just think that's got to be such a difficult thing to bring up. But I love that your, perseverance and just being like, hey, this is what it is. If you want me to work here, great. If not, but I'm with Christy. What Christy alluded to in the beginning is saying so many organizations claim DEI and accessibility. And accessibility, of course, is different for everyone depending on what their situation is. But they're not. I mean, I'm actually astonished how
Right.
much is not being used these days, or how many people aren't following these practices. So I know that's got to be a struggle. With Meta, which of course that sounds like it was an incredible job for you and that you really enjoyed it. What's happened there? And because I know you're no longer with Meta, and what has your transition now into job seeking looked like for you?
So I was laid off in the first big layoffs last year in November, and I was one of them, and I was pretty shocked. I thought they valued disabled people, and I made a huge impact on the company, and I was gone like that, and I was shocked, and it was really hard, and it really messed up my life for several months. And so, because I had a bad manager in my last year of Meta, I would just let you know that caused that. And actually, I didn't have support from the leadership to solve some issues that were happening, and they'd been going on for a year. And so finally, after a whole year, we fixed those issues, and I was laid off. And so I had to handle my own schedule and schedule my interpreters. I mean, it was fine. I mean, I miss so many of the people that I worked with, and I think it was the leadership, that the lack of properly supporting and encouraging disabled people. That's what was missing there. We, as deaf people, had to work hard to move up. We were on the bottom, and we had to move up. And, they gave me a limited number of hours for interpreters. And I said, no, I can't have that. I need interpreters. I need more. Come on. I need them for all kinds of different things, that I do within my job. I think they gave me 20 hours a week or something like that. It was really ridiculous. So anyway.
So I've got a question. Yep. Hold on. Yep.
Okay. Hit me.
My question is, how many deaf people were in Meta?
Oh, good question.
Yep.
Okay, I forgot to say that. Thanks for that. So I was the second deaf signer that needed interpreters. So 2 in the whole company. The
Wow.
first one was hired in 2019, I think in October. 2018, October. And I was hired in March of 2019. So at that time, it was still cool, and then I went downhill after that.
Wow. I'm honestly, I'm shocked and kind of
Especially from Meta.
irritated. 2 people in that period of time. I mean, and this goes back to what I was saying.
Signing deaf people, yes.
Yeah, they're claiming that they're so inclusive, and it's like, you have 2 people out of how many? Like, what a joke. I mean, wow. So I guess to get back to where we were going with that, now the layoff and what that looks like in your job search and those struggles and what you're going after, recovering, of course, and this is a big thing that Christy and I, and why we wanted to do this show, is the mental impact that the layoffs, job seeking is having on so many people, because the job market has changed dramatically. And so it's so important. And I'm grateful that you shared that it did spiral you off and it put you in a not feeling in a good place, because so many people can relate to that. So thank you for that share. And then now let's go on to where you are today and with your job search.
I've been looking for almost 8 months, almost 9 months, so let me think. I mean, I had an offer this week, a deaf-owned company. So we're going to see. I'm not making any judgments. I'm in a really, you never know what could happen. Something could come up, I mean, it could be a major market crash and then there are no jobs. I mean, I'm kind of being funny, but kind of not. So the job search, I'm doing that. I'm taking care of my mental health because, how can I say this? My wife wanted me to go to the doctor to get some medication, and I did, and that helped because I was a different person. I wasn't smiling anymore. I wasn't going out. I wasn't doing stuff. I'm the type of person that, I made the money for the household, and after this, I was like, I'm the provider. And I had to really work on myself. And I figure I've got to get a job. It took a toll on me. I had to redo my resume. I hadn't done a resume for almost 10 years, So, I said, okay, now I have to apply to these jobs. And so I made major changes, did that over 3 months. I also, during that time, kind of learned more about who I am and networking with people and growing my network and using the power that I had from Meta to really improve my self-esteem and my career. So, at that time, I was like, oh, wait a minute. I wasn't too sure how I could get to that job search and show them the kind of person I was. It was like, okay, well, what can I do? And it took 8 months. I mean, it was very, very difficult for me at that time. So now I'm sending out resumes. I've applied to 3 or 4 job sites and I'm networking. I do a lot of talking with people, a lot of engagement. And that seems to work better for marketing than just applications. Those don't seem to work as well. So the marketing, the networking, that's important for me.
So where do you, I mean, and this is great if you have a job offer, and
yes,
people will hate me to say this, but I say this to my clients. If you get a job and that other job comes down the road, you're a business. You're going to have to, because now you've done what, you now understand the mental toll it takes. Here, you worked for a company, you were loyal to a company, and yeah, they showed how loyal they were to you. They aren't. I'm sorry, companies, but you're not.
No, they don't care.
You sit there and talk about your mental health, life, work balance, diversity. It's just, I feel like they're a bunch of politicians. But anyway, so once,
That is
you
exactly.
know, yes, you go forward, you get a job. But my question is how, and I'm very naive. So how has it, when you apply and then they turn around and find out you're deaf, what's the positive and what's the negative, responses? We know somebody that just got off of a call with a recruiter today, that they reached out after the person applied and they said, "Oh, you're not this." And they're like, "Well, no, it's not on my resume. The job description doesn't say that I need to do this. Why are you calling me?" And they're like, "Well, I get paid for every call I make." Okay, so you're screwing with somebody's mental health that's looking for a job. You're wasting their time and you're dishonest. You're not putting all the crap that's supposed to be in the job description. That's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So the frustration that you all are having to deal with, so having you be deaf and then having, you have an interview, it's sort of like when I called you and a woman answered the phone. And I was like, what? I've never done interpreters before. And yeah, and then they're, whoever was like, no, it's me. This is the female interpreter. And I'm like, oh, okay. I had to get my mindset around that because I didn't know.
Uh-huh.
So what do you say about all that?
So yeah, you just explained a really good example. I have to explain to every new person that I meet, a new manager, a new interview board panel, who I am and what I need. And I've become very used to it, right? And so I've become very efficient at explaining it as well. But to be honest, it's very tiring. DEI, right? People say they're inclusive, but they don't teach, they don't educate, they don't train other people.
Nope.
And we have real life people out there that you could see, talk with, and understand their experiences. When you show a slideshow talking about it, that's just checking a box. You need to really get that lived experience to really get the point across. Typically, I've had really good responses. People will say, "Oh, you're deaf? Okay, that's fine." But they'll call. I explain that if they call me, it'll go through a video relay service interpreter. And I have to explain that because if people don't understand that, they'll hang up if they hear that female voice expecting to hear me. And then they'll call back again. And that creates confusion. So I always have to explain, hey, before you call, just know that it's going to connect to a video relay service interpreter, probably a female. You'll be talking to me. So whether I'm talking to a manager, a recruiter, and then when I finally talk to a manager, a hiring recruiter, every step of the way, I have to explain it. And that's not something that people think about that don't have to deal with this.
That's true.
So I've seen it be a lot easier for people that don't have to explain it to the people in that process. And when I'm not a good fit, I understand that I'm not a good fit. One time I asked an interpreter to be there for a hiring manager interview. It was for a video conference through Zoom. Excuse the interpreter, I had to clarify. So the hiring manager said, "Hey, can we just go do it through Zoom?" And I said, "Well, it's going to be really hard to just type out my answers unless you have an interpreter. You might think less of me." So he said, "I don't care. Let's just do it anyways." So we did the interview. I had to type out all my answers. And then later on, it turns out he hired someone internally. And then I found out that I actually knew somebody that worked in the company and they didn't hire someone internally. They had found somebody externally. He lied. But the point is, sorry if I use cuss words.
No.
That's okay.
That type of thing happens. And I have to explain every time I'm trying to get hired, hoping that they'll be okay with it. So that's the part that's hard.
I mean, that's just for me as a human being, and I'm somebody that's hired and interviewed hundreds of people over my career. That pisses me off. Like, that is so terrible, and is inexcusable, quite frankly, especially from a hiring manager and HR department. Like, the basis of that position should be compassion and empathy, period. I mean, that really angers me and makes me sick that someone actually went through, and this is happening to a lot of people. And I think it's terrible to do to anyone, that they're just going through the process of these interviews with absolutely no plan of hiring the person, but going through the process or putting out job positions that don't really exist because they have to post so many and people are applying and never hearing anything. So it's a constant push pull emotionally. But I feel, for you, Brenden, and this, I mean, really gets me personally for a lot of reasons, that you have to explain yourself over and over and over and over again. That just has to be exhausting. And it does feel like there should be an easier way where we are in the world with technology. Um, and again, I go back to the whole meta thing, having two deaf people, that's unacceptable. But this hiring process, just for me as an example, is so aggravating. Adding your layer of complexity and frustration, I could see how that could make you just have days where you're like, you know what? I'm tapping out for the day or the week. I can't even deal with this, because it's not inspiring. It has to feel like such an uphill battle.
So I'm gonna take a break to go through the comments.
Yeah, let's do.
Give you ladies a break. Okay, so Greg says, good to see everybody.
Great.
We've got Jeff.
Hey, Jeff.
We adore Jeff. Jeff was on, it was last week,
Yep.
right? Okay, last week. And he's still battling the bullshit that's out there.
Yes.
And then we have Hope to Make It the Happy Fairy. Ladies, this is awesome. I love what you're doing in this space. Aaron.
Hey.
Hello.
Yes.
Somebody who's probably off of somebody's Facebook.
Yeah.
Unless you can see that person's name. It's not my Facebook.
Not mine either.
And Ebola. There you go. Christine. And this is true. Mark was on our first show.
Yes, Mark.
You should look. And then Greg comes back and says, when we look in our networks for opportunities where Brenden might be interested, how can we help educate others?
Yes. Great question.
It goes back to these companies are politicians. They're splitting out crap that they're not following.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's garbage.
And then Jeff again,
I know.
Well, he might. We're hopefully soon. And then I mean, that's not an interview. I mean, it's and it goes back to the empathy.
Yeah.
I understand recruiters are tight because a lot of people they've been laid off. But so now all the recruiters have to realize that they're all looking for a job. And remember how you've treated people.
Yeah. Because
now people are going to be treating you that way. I mean, it's not that hard just to be honest and with kindness and just say, look.
I mean,
now, do you have on your resume anywhere saying that you're deaf?
No.
Nope.
I do that to avoid any bias. I would put down, like on a government form, they would ask you, your disability, your race, your gender.
Yeah.
I would always say, refuse to answer. The form seems to have improved, the questionnaire, but typically I don't disclose.
How do you feel though that with people, because I understand that, because you want to be at least to get your resume moved down the funnel, if you will. But then how do they respond when you do tell them? Do you feel like you get knocked out as soon as you say I'm deaf? And I shouldn't say always, but do you feel like that is a big barrier for you to break through at a lot of organizations?
It seems like the companies that I'm trying for are at a minimum inclusive or trying to be inclusive. So how Hilton handled my situation was really interesting. So I applied for a job with Hilton, and I interviewed with them, but they had the wrong type of agency. They couldn't even understand. They hired the wrong type of agency that couldn't even understand me, and I got really upset. And I typed out and said, I'm going to file a complaint. Anyways, they reached out to me, and I found out on LinkedIn that they had a person who ran the HR department. I reached out to them and he said, oh, I'm so sorry. We'll get back to you. And then they've worked on improving that. So the Hilton Hotel is very friendly. They're very accommodating. They've hired the right agency to make it better for people with a disability. The process sometimes is broken within HR. And so when they have the right people in place, they can have things improve. So Hilton has got a strange situation where they have a really cool accessibility partner, but they don't have a good HR company within the overall organization.
Interesting.
There's a very low incident of signing deaf people within the US. So many people, hearing people, live in places where they will never run into a deaf person. Then you have hubs of deaf community locations. So for example, Austin, Seattle, Fremont, California, those are hubs where you will most definitely run into deaf people because there's lots of people that live there.
Interesting.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I didn't either. I was thinking of so many things when he was saying all that. One of the statistics that I saw that I found interesting was that the deaf community actually have a higher rate of self-employment and their own business. And I would imagine that is due to the fact of they need to create their own accommodations because they can't get it elsewhere.
So there's a higher percentage of self-employed deaf individuals because, yes, you're right. They are inspired to do something for the world, to give back to the world, or they're thinking about a business being more successful than just being an employee within an organization. I think the unfortunate statistic is 70% of the deaf community is unemployed. And that can be because they're on SSI, or they just don't feel like it, or they don't want to try. So there's lots of reasons. Or again, also companies won't hire them. So they're forced to depend on public assistance. There's a variety of deaf people out there. I am what is called a high-level deaf person. I'm fluent in English, and I'm more of a rarity within the deaf community. So you have a wide variety of different experiences. I would say I'm not the high. I'd be more in the middle, I guess. There are people more educated than me. Then there's other folks that are hard of hearing that can hear well enough to navigate a hearing world without an interpreter. They are not worse off than me. Excuse the interpreter. They are worse off than me because I notice that they don't always gain access to what's happening in their environment, and they're not asking for interpreting services. And so when they're struggling, the company just says, too bad, you have to make do. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are profoundly deaf that maybe don't have fluency in English, that maybe write or read at a 3rd or 4th grade level. So their first language is American Sign Language. And so they're not able to really necessarily translate from English to ASL. The grammar is completely different. Instead of saying, I'm going to the store, they'll say, me store go. And if you were going to write that out into English, people would think that you are not literate and would think that you're not smart enough to have a job. So,
but don't you think that's part of, I actually didn't know it was 70% unemployment. That's actually the same as the blind community, which is, I can't believe it. Like, that's mind blowing to me and completely unacceptable. But I think there's also,
I just want to clarify, that's the deaf signing community, 70% unemployment rate. For hard of hearing individuals, it's not that high.
That's crazy. It should not be that high. And I think, to go back to a point, Brenden, that you made earlier, is not being promoted. That hit a point with me, like a chord, because, and again, I've got a blind person in my family, so I've definitely seen some issues of what happens in the job market and how ignorant people can be. Because I've had people say to me, well, wow, he doesn't look blind. which I'm not sure what a blind person is supposed to look like. But there's some kind of misinterpretation that, like you were saying about the difference in the language, that they're not as bright simply because that they don't speak or that they can't hear. Like that to me is just so bizarre.
Well, it's ignorant,
right?
It's truly just ignorance.
Yes. I mean, because I just sit here and truthfully, even though Brenden hasn't said one word, like he is a glowing light and has an amazing personality. Like who wouldn't want to be around him? Like I've enjoyed this conversation so much. And I'm so blessed that we're able to even bring this out to LinkedIn and to other platforms to have this conversation. Because I do want to scream to all those companies that are claiming DEI and accessibility and such. You're not doing a good job.
Nope. So where do you go from here? I mean, this is going to be on a different level to open up the eyes of these politicians. That's the only way I can talk about these corporations, because even small companies, this whole DEI came about and they shout it off the rooftop and it's all about this and it's all about this. And to me, it's full of crap. For the things that they have to actually work for the people that have disabilities that they have to actually assist, small or big, the other DEIs and stuff like that, sorry, I'm going to be so unpolitically correct, but the pronouns and all that wonderful stuff, that puts in that little category. But when you have people who are like, blind, deaf, and even mute, or, I don't know, anything like that, that you're going to need assistance in a certain time. I mean, and I'm going around in circles because my mind's just blowing up right now. You have where religious beliefs, they have praying rooms. A mother has, to go milk whatever, because I'm not a mom, so I don't know these things. But to have somebody looking at Brenden and what he's done and, wanting to grow, yet having companies go, well, no, we're not going to give you all this stuff, even though you're successful at what you're doing. But hey, we're all about DEA or DEI or, diversity. Yeah. That's why I work for myself.
Look here, Christy. Mark Toscano put up a pretty long comment here.
Okay, hold on. I got to read it from here. As an agency recruiter, if I'm looking for a candidate on LinkedIn or any other social media, there's usually no indication that the person needs an interpreter. And I have never had anyone ask for an interpreter in order to interview. What can or should I do to make sure that, deaf community knows that my clients are fully accepting of the hearing impaired candidates? And I use the typical EEOC notice in the post, but that doesn't do it. Well, for the fact that Brenden doesn't even fill it out.
Yeah.
So what do you say, Brenden?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to say. Always ask if they need anything to make their experience better. So you don't have to be specific about disability. Say, is there anything that I can do to help make our discussion go better? And they might say, oh, an interpreter would be good. So it's really hard for some people. They're not going to tell you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what. You can't force them to tell you. So I did that for many years. I didn't tell them I needed interpreters. I just did my best and got by while I was interviewing. I did that for many years. And then when I got to Meta, I was like, they gave me interpreters and I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So, what can I say?
Wow.
So with this new job going forward, if this happens, they know that you're deaf. Or do they know that you need an interpreter? I mean, are they set up for this?
Oh, yeah. Yep. for sure. They know because I interviewed. And so then they knew, yes. And if anything happens later, it's not my fault. I told them.
That's right.
True.
You disclosed.
Absolutely. True. So how can we help you and help the community, but also help other job seekers? We're big on men's mental health. It is harder on men during this time while they're searching for jobs. Yes, it's hard for women, but when you're the man who's bringing home the bacon and, you spiral down, how can we help? How can we screen?
Yeah, anything. Yeah. And what can we put out there to help other even deaf job seekers, a little good takeaway, but just, how can we help you and others that are in the same circumstance? Because I agree with Christy, it's hard on women too, and especially if they're the breadwinner. So that's even next level. But you hit on that right in the beginning, saying that was such a thing for you, and even, and thank God your wife and you have that conversation and you go see a doctor to help you for it, because there's nothing wrong with that. So I think that was such an important share, because there's a lot of people that are going through that. Because most of the people that Christy and I have been talking to of late, it's not that they've been out of work for a month, 2 months. It's been 8, 9, 10, 12 and more months, which is not the norm from our past. So it's definitely taking a completely different toll.
Okay, wow, that was a lot all in one thing. Let's start. Okay, so how can you help deaf job seekers? Let's start with that. So first of all, we can only do so much, right? So we need some type of education or exposure across the board for people. Before any company can make any real changes, they need to have disabled people at the top, right?
Yes.
So they don't have that. So we're spinning our wheels, right? So they recruit them and then they leave the job because they don't get what they need. And then it's a vicious cycle. So it's hard to actually get that 100%, but there can be policies made, good policies, and make sure that the HR department knows what they're doing. Number two, for small companies, they tend to have a harder time paying for interpreters. I'm talking about small companies, interpreters, there's a charge for interpreters, and that comes out of their budget. So there should be some tax exemptions. Maybe I think for a year they do have it, but something more. There should be some type of benefit for a deaf person working there, right? I work harder than the average employee, just to let you know. Deaf employees work harder than average hearing employees. You guys are like talking and talking and talking, and I'm focusing on my work, and I'm getting more product out there, right? So that's how I do explain to employers. So we need more people who have more exposure to the deaf community and to the deaf community and business world. We need some media out there. We need allies. Like Dancing with the Stars. I don't care about that. Marley, I don't care about all that. That's entertainment. Let's take entertainment out of it. That's not what I'm talking about. We need people in real world jobs, right? Yeah. So that's where promotions can happen. So I think we should stop using DEI as an excuse. Like, oh yeah, we're big on DEI. Yeah, you're not. Normally they're not including disabled people at the top. So I think it should be separate from disability inclusion. Like I started with those 3 groups. We started with African Americans back in the day, then we went on to women's rights, and then Latino rights, right? So we were working on all of these groups, and I want to say, let's take that disability out of those different groups and say, let's work on disabled people right now. So I think there's there's difference in America with all of the different groups. So I think that we need to work together.
For me, disability and that's disability. I'm curious as Sherm, is the HR. big HR, they have huge events and everything. If they could get involved and start training their HR people, because this is the
Yeah.
association that HR people are involved.
Yeah.
You know, it's SHR SHRM.
Yeah,
I
there's an
believe.
event here
But
on
that's,
Thursday.
yeah, and Linda Michaels, who's going to be coming on, was just talking on them. But to have that in their events,
Yeah.
so because I'm just curious. I'm not an
Yeah,
HR
there you
person,
go.
but I know I've dealt with a lot of HR people that are just like, do you not even know what's going on? Ooh. No. There you go. We're all good. Sorry.
So that's actually a good idea, working with HR. Some companies handle HR differently. You know, like sometimes HR doesn't really take care of the accommodations. It's actually a separate entity that does that. So Meta was under HR. And so I was quite far under. It went through a lot of steps before it got there. But at the same time, recruiting doesn't happen under HR necessarily. They're their own entity. So would it be under HR or would it not? It depends on the company.
Yeah.
Interesting. I don't know. My mind's spinning.
I know.
So,
Well,
but my point is leadership needs to be trained. That's my whole point.
I was going to say, because I definitely have worked with many HR departments, and the person that's running HR doesn't know anything about HR and has no business. All they are is a gatekeeper to the C-level staff and how they're hiring. They know nothing. They have no certifications. And they're the ones doing the screening with no background in doing it. They're just doing it on their own bias and what the C-level is asking for, and that's it. It's not very often that you get into an organization that has a true HR department and all of those components rolled up into it. That unfortunately, it usually is that sort of middle manager that knows nothing and likely has not much experience in the business world to begin with. So
Yep,
that's a big problem. And I actually am. Now that you just said that the Sherm Christy there is an event here on Thursday in Phoenix, and a gal that I do some nonprofit work with, she's attending. So I'm going to make sure, and I can't go, but I'm definitely going to have a conversation with her because she's connected to the HR community here locally. And of course, the headline about it is about DEI and accessibility.
Imagine that.
Yeah. So I'm definitely going to reach out to her and get some more info, because the more that we have these conversations, it's more eye-opening, just because it's like, wow, there's so many things that should be happening that aren't happening. And it's a facade that it's happening. But it's not. And it's unbelievable. So I'm so grateful that we get to have these conversations. And as we're getting here on the top of the hour, I do want to get back to, Brenden, what can we do to help you? We of course want to get you as much exposure as possible. Hopefully you'll get that position that you're wanting, but man, we're here to help you in any way we can. We're definitely connected with a lot of recruiters. I think this is going to be so beneficial for so many people and will create more conversation. So I guess kind of to get us wrapped, or, kind of what are your final thoughts? What can we do to help you?
Oh, sorry. I've got to show this.
Oh,
there
awesome.
You go.
Wow.
There you go. Okay. Thank you, Paul.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Wow. Good to know.
Yes.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Very unfortunate.
So what you all already have helped me with this exposure on your platform. I want to get more exposure with these types of events because I love doing this type of thing.
Love it.
I typically have done presentations at Meta when they had new hires. They had a 300 to 800 hired pool every week. They were dumb. They overhired, obviously, but they typically would. I did 36 presentations of those new hires over those 3 years that I was in that particular role. So they would watch me, they would hear my words, and then they would kind of take that information out into the world and help more people understand to become more allies in their daily work with me. I love public speaking. I love opportunities like this. So I'm throwing that out there.
Great.
Just get me more platforms that I can speak about this topic on. Then the impact is wider. And to me, deaf people are at the most disadvantaged position in society because they hit a communication wall all the time. Let me give you an example. Let's say I go to apply at McDonald's, right? I have a high level of degree in education. The manager would look at me and laugh at me because they can't communicate with me. That's what they would think about. So I love to explain that in person or on this type of platform than just writing it out and posting it. People don't often think about this. And I need more people to be involved in this education. For example, Paul here that's watching is giving us different tidbits. I really appreciate that. We need more people like that. We also need to hire more people that know this information in different companies so that people that are disabled can have more opportunities. Like you said, or I said that there were 2 deaf signing people in Meta. They're gone. There are no deaf signing people in Meta. So Meta's kind of gone back to an old caveman time, if you will. You know, all of the progress that we've made has been lost. And so I just want to say, you know, include these topics out in the public conversation. It's important. And that will help us get jobs in the long run. It creates a really big impact.
Love it. Christy?
Well, that's why we like the live.
Yeah.
Because even though you can't talk, you got somebody talking for us. And this has been such an interesting and learning experience, even for me, as old as I am. I mean, I'm an old one, but you know, you just, because I want to say, I don't think I know anybody who's deaf. My husband can't hear out of one ear, but he says that. I don't know if he just does that because he says I can't hear you.
Yeah.
You know.
Yes. And just with Brenden's last thing, I'm like, I'm already thinking about things that I want to talk to Christy about doing with Brenden. I think because you're fantastic on camera. Like you exude such personality. I know you called it ADHD at the very beginning, but man, you come across so great. And I think there is a place for you to be on this platform doing this regularly and doing speaking, because you're a natural and you are fantastic and you're obviously passionate about it. We could not be more grateful to have had this opportunity to have you with us and for working with us as we learned how this whole process worked too, because it was new. And Christy, of course, I have to thank because she was the one that helped figure it out. To both interpreters for being with us. We thank you so much for your time and helping us.
Them as well.
Before I do final wrap, do you have anything else that you want to say?
No, I'm just in awe.
Okay, me too. I am.
I'm speechless. You know, and you know, I'm thinking TED Talks for you.
Oh my gosh, yes.
You do have a presence.
Yes.
And for the fact that, you know,
I would love to. I can get on TED Talks. It's pretty hard to get into that.
Yes, but you got to start somewhere.
It just hello, right here doing LinkedIn Lives. It just, for the fact that you understand corporate worlds, you understand the companies, and as you said, you work harder than anybody else because you're not listening to all the stuff that's, you know, talking behind you or whatever. You're doing your job. So this is, you know, it's a no-brainer to have somebody who's going to do their job over sitting over the water cooler gossiping about, you know, what was on, you know, Dancing with Stars type of thing.
Right. I mean, so great. Again, such a blessing to be able. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and you said, I forgot to say, deaf people work harder because they focus well, and also jobs don't come easy to us.
Yeah.
Like, so
Right.
when we are committed, we're committed and we're long term. So I forgot to mention that as well.
Love it. I mean, again, such a blessing and an honor and true privilege to have you with us today, Brenden. We will definitely be talking offline. To everyone that joined us today, thank you so much for being with us. If you have any additional questions, I know this was an episode to really listen to, but if you have any further questions, please do put them in the comments and we will all go back and check them out. Reach out to Brenden, connect with Brenden, make connections for Brenden. Please do. And we look forward to seeing everyone next Tuesday at 1:11 p.m. For another episode of The Awesome Journey. And until then, we're all on this journey together, and together we do make it awesome. Have a great day, everyone.